I remember the day my wife, Hannah Henderson, and I first toured the quiet streets of Arcadia Ridge, a mid-sized planned community nestled just beyond the city limits. Manicured lawns, decorative street lamps, and uniform fences extended in neat rows, giving the impression of serene order. Compared to the chaotic neighborhoods we'd seen elsewhere, Arcadia Ridge felt like a haven. At the time, I was working as a contractor for a tech firm, and Hannah had returned from her recent deployment in the Special Operations Branch of the U.S. military. Our hope was that Arcadia Ridge would provide the calm she needed to transition into civilian life. We didn't know much about HOAs beyond the generic stereotypes, strict guidelines about fence heights, a preference for subdued house colors, and a monthly meeting to discuss landscaping budgets. Our real estate agent assured us that the HOA here is quite friendly, just a group of neighbors ensuring the community stays clean and welcoming. Hannah and I made an offer on a modest single-story home, charmed by the front porch and large backyard that would accommodate gatherings with our extended family. She was especially fond of the built-in fire pit, envisioning evenings spent roasting marshmallows with nieces and nephews. I loved the notion of a quiet office space in the finished basement where I could work remote in peace. Our first month in Arcadia Ridge passed with little excitement. Neighbors waved politely. Occasional flyers appeared in our mailbox announcing board meetings or social events. Hannah, still reacclimating from her final overseas tour, spent her early mornings jogging through the neighborhood, finding solace in the tree-lined paths. She noticed every detail. Her training made her hyper-aware of vantage points, blind corners, and anything unusual. By the time she finished each run, she had a mental map of every home, the cars and driveways, in which residents were early risers. Despite her vigilance, there was no immediate sense of danger. It was quiet, perhaps too quiet, but we chalked that up to suburban normalcy. If anything, Hannah looked almost bored. After years of high-stress operations, day-to-day life here seemed trivial. Things changed gradually, like the slow tightening of a vise, and it started when we received our first courtesy notice in the mailbox. A letter emblazoned with the HOA's official logo, but with a line at the bottom that read signed, Arnett, aka Karen, compliance officer, informed us that our front shrubs were growing unevenly and would require trimming in accordance with the HOA's guidelines. It didn't strike me as offensive. I assumed it was a normal request. Hannah, however, arched an eyebrow. Compliance officer? I thought they had a board, not a separate position for that. We didn't know it yet, but the author of that letter, Rosalind Arnett, commonly called Karen behind her back, would soon become our greatest source of conflict. The promise of peace in Arcadia Ridge would unravel one rule at a time. Over the next few weeks, I kept hearing the same name crop up in neighborly chit-chat, Karen. People typically use this moniker with exasperation or fear. Initially, I assumed Karen was a playful label for a type of busybody. But as we settled in, it became clear that Karen referred to a single individual, someone who took on the role of neighborhood watchdog to an extreme degree. Rosalind Arnett was a middle-aged woman with a sharply styled bob, impeccably polished nails, and a perpetually disapproving expression. She lived in a two-story colonial with a meticulously kept front yard that boasted symmetrical rosebushes and carefully spaced stepping stones. She was rumored to be on the HOA board, or at least associated with it in an unofficial capacity, yet her power extended far beyond standard board responsibilities. People whispered that she had connections in local government and real estate, that she carried secret influence far exceeding her official role. It wasn't unusual to see her patrolling the neighborhood in the early morning, clipboards in hand, jabbing a finger at any home that violated the smallest detail of the association's charter. A trash bin left out too long? Expect a note taped to your door. A car parked crookedly in the driveway? Prepare for an emailed reprimand. Grass a few inches too high? Potentially a fine. The severity of her interventions varied, but everyone agreed on one point. Karen loved the feeling of authority. Hannah and I remained mostly under her radar at first. Our minor notice for the shrub trimming was easily remedied. Hannah clipped them into shape, and we didn't receive any more letters for a while. Still, an incident one Sunday morning gave me pause. I caught Karen peering over our fence during Hannah's post-run stretches. When she realized I was watching, she feigned an innocent wave and hurried off. That unsettled me. If she was bold enough to snoop openly, how much further might she go when no one was looking? I soon learned from neighbors that complaining about Karen's prying rarely helped. Most said the best approach was to comply with any demand she made, real or imagined, just to avoid further trouble. She's got no official job, but she's always at the board meetings, one neighbor confided. You push back, she doubles down. Indeed, rumors circulated that she had cost at least one family thousands of dollars in legal fees due to a protracted code dispute. Hannah found the entire situation equal parts absurd and irritating. It's America, she would say in a half-joking tone. We pay our mortgage, our taxes, and now we also have to worry about the yard police? She was used to following orders, strict, military orders, but only because they served a clear, greater purpose. The arbitrary rules enforced by a self-appointed neighborhood tyrant didn't sit well with her sense of autonomy and fairness. Yet we pressed on with normal life, believing our path wouldn't cross Karen's in any serious way. We were wrong. In the coming weeks, Hannah's background and Karen's lust for control would collide spectacularly. Arcadia Ridge had a monthly HOA meeting in the community clubhouse, a modest building near the entrance of the subdivision. Hannah and I decided to attend one evening. We had begun hearing rumors that new regulations were on the table, including more frequent yard inspections and restrictions on holiday decorations. It seemed prudent to learn about the rules from the source rather than rely on gossip. Stepping inside, we saw about 24 neighbors gathered in rows of folding chairs. A long table stood at the front, where 4 board members sat: an older gentleman named Carl, a soft-spoken woman named Patricia, a young accountant named Ron, and last, occupying the seat at the far right, Rosalind Karen Arnett, perched as if she owned the place. The official board president was Carl, but from the dynamic in the room, you'd never guess that. Karen dominated the conversation, flipping through paperwork and reading bullet points with an air of practiced superiority. Carl attempted to open the meeting in a cordial tone. Good evening, everyone. Let's start by reviewing last month's minutes. Karen waved him off impatiently. Yes, we'll get to that. First, we must address the urgent matter of non-compliant landscaping on Maplewood Lane. Several properties are refusing to maintain the same standard of shrub height. She proceeded to list addresses and detailed infractions, her tone scolding. A few homeowners raised their hands to defend themselves, but Karen talked over them, citing visual discord and property value risks. Hannah's gaze remained steady on Karen, an expression I recognized as the same one she wore in briefings whenever faced with an adversarial or nonsensical directive. It wasn't anger, more a deep frustration at the inefficiency and overreach. Then Karen introduced a new motion, an enforcement committee to conduct routine checks, talk with residents, and keep the neighborhood up to code. She claimed that volunteers had already signed up, individuals who cared deeply about Arcadia Ridge. When a few neighbors asked who these volunteers were, Karen deflected, saying it would be revealed once the committee is finalized. Carl and Patricia exchanged uneasy glances. Ron looked downright nervous. It became evident that the other board members had minimal control compared to Karen's forward push. The meeting ended without any formal vote on the new measures. Karen simply announced them as if they were a done deal. She even handed out typed pamphlets outlining the committee's authority, urging residents to respect it. On our way out, we overheard anxious whispers. This is going too far. She's practically turning the HOA into a police force. Another voice muttered, I don't like it, but who's going to stand up to her? She's got the majority of the board wrapped around her finger. Hannah was quiet during the drive home. That night, after she settled in bed, she murmured, this is so wrong. Someone needs to push back. But at that point, it was just a lingering thought. We still believed we could coexist without becoming targets of Karen's newly formed enforcement committee. Within days, rumors of Karen's enforcement committee proved true. 4 or 5 individuals, neighbors we barely recognized, started making rounds through the streets, clipboards in tow, checking for any perceived irregularities. It was bizarre to see them prowling around, peering into yards, sometimes snapping photos on their phones. The entire ambience of Arcadia Ridge took a paranoid turn. Several neighbors found notes pinned to their doors or taped to their mailboxes. Some were warnings about grass length. Others cited excessive noise or failure to adhere to uniform curb numbering. One family even got cited for letting their teenage son's pickup truck remain in the driveway instead of parking in the garage. When questioned, these enforcement committee members recited lines straight from Karen's pamphlet. We're protecting the beauty and value of our community. Hannah watched them from our window one Saturday afternoon as they stood at the property next door, measuring the distance between a row of hedges and the sidewalk. She shook her head and said, this is borderline harassment. They're stepping onto private property without permission. Later that day, we learned from a frantic neighbor, Mrs. Platt, that Karen herself had threatened to fine her $500 because of an unapproved garden statue near the front porch. Mrs. Platt complained that the statue, a small, tasteful angel, had been there for years without issue. She was reduced to tears, worried about how to fight an arbitrary fine that arrived on official-looking HOA letterhead. It became clear that Karen was using this new committee as her personal squad of rule enforcers, issuing citations that might not even be valid. The question was, who would challenge her? While these events unfolded, Hannah focused on her day-to-day routine. She had begun consulting work for a private security firm, using her experience from special ops to help design safety protocols for corporate buildings. The job was flexible, allowing her to work from home, though it also meant she was around to see the committee's activities throughout the day. One afternoon, she spotted two members of Karen's group approaching our side gate, presumably to inspect the backyard. Without hesitation, she went outside and intercepted them. "May I help you?" she asked, polite but firm. The two individuals, one a retired gentleman with watery eyes, the other a middle-aged woman who barely made eye contact, shifted awkwardly. Finally, the man said, "We're just, verifying everyone's backyard fences are uniform height." Hannah crossed her arms. "We built nothing new. Our fence matches the original design. You can clearly see that from the street." They stammered something about policy, but Hannah didn't budge. Ultimately, they retreated down the sidewalk, muttering about probable noncompliance. Hannah stood at the gate, unwavering, until they disappeared around the corner. That evening, she confided in me that she suspected Karen's power trip was about more than aesthetics. "This feels like intimidation, plain and simple. She might be trying to push certain families out, or maybe she just craves control. Either way, I don't like it." Neither did I. But like most neighbors, we weren't sure how best to respond. Taking on Karen meant risking her wrath, and none of us yet realized just how far she and her committee were willing to go in the name of enforcement. After several weeks of these intrusive inspections, certain names kept popping up. Stan Quinn, a muscular man rumored to have ties to local security services; Eddie Klein, a perpetually scowling individual who wore cheap sunglasses even at dusk; Marcia Delgado, who introduced herself as the committee secretary. All these individuals answered directly to Karen. When asked who made them official enforcers, they pointed to the typed pamphlets as if that alone conferred legal authority. Whenever an irate homeowner confronted them, Karen appeared from nowhere to scold the resident for obstruction of committee duties. She'd wave her smartphone, threatening to record the confrontation or forward it to the board as evidence of aggression. The psychological pressure was immense. Elderly residents seemed especially targeted because they were less likely to push back or understand the complexities of HOA regulations. Hannah observed these patterns with growing disquiet. Her training taught her to assess vulnerabilities and anticipate escalation. She noted that the committee typically operated in pairs or trios, no doubt to bolster their bravado. She also noticed them employing intimidation tactics, standing too close, speaking in raised voices, demanding immediate compliance rather than following any official dispute process. In her mind, it was reminiscent of soft intimidation, used by small-time militia groups overseas, though the stakes were obviously much lower here. One evening, Hannah took a slow drive around the neighborhood, making mental notes of houses that had been targeted. She discovered a pattern. Properties with slight deviations from HOA guidelines were singled out, but so were homes owned by people who'd publicly voiced concerns about the board's overreach. Karen's group was going after both actual bylaw violations and personal vendettas. An important point of confusion for residents was how official Karen's status really was. The actual HOA board, on paper, consisted of 4 members, including Karen. Technically, changes required a vote. Yet Karen behaved like the de facto president, claiming that emergency powers or unanimous prior approval allowed her to take immediate action. When questioned, she'd brandish a binder full of complicated jargon that only she seemed to understand. Carl and Patricia, 2 of the legitimate board members, tried to reassure residents that no new rules had been ratified. Yet Karen insisted otherwise. The conflicting messages caused widespread anxiety. Homeowners felt uncertain whether they should pay the fines or risk a steeper penalty. More ominous rumors began swirling, talk of Karen filing liens on properties that didn't comply. She gave frequent final notices with arbitrary deadlines, threatening legal action. Some neighbors, especially those with tight finances, worried that even a baseless lien might disrupt their mortgage refinancing or property insurance. Through it all, Hannah and I managed to avoid direct run-ins. Our property remained meticulously maintained, and we double-checked any compliance issue that might be used against us. Little did we know how close we were to a tipping point, an event that would bring the spotlight directly onto us, specifically onto Hannah. And that event, ironically, started with a simple accusation about noise. Despite her disciplined routine, Hannah did enjoy listening to music in the garage when she worked on personal fitness routines, jump rope, light weights, calisthenics. She wasn't blasting it at concert-level volume, but it was energetic enough. By 6:30 a.m., she'd typically finish, then head inside to shower and start the workday. One cool morning, around 6:45 a.m., a loud knock rattled our front door. I opened it to find Stan Quinn and Eddie Klein, two of Karen's most loyal enforcers, on the porch. Both men had that posture of forced intimidation, shoulders back, chins raised. "Good morning," I said, trying to remain civil. "Something I can help you with?" Stan pushed forward a piece of paper. "We received a noise complaint about your property. Excessive music before 7 a.m. That's a direct violation of the HOA's quiet hours policy." I raised an eyebrow. I'm not aware of a policy that states 7 a.m. is the cutoff. The official document I received after moving in said quiet hours end at 6 a.m. Eddie smirked. "We updated it recently. The new rule is no loud noises before 7. It's to respect those who might be sleeping." Hannah appeared behind me, wearing workout leggings and a sweatshirt, sweat still glistening on her forehead. She peered over my shoulder. "I was playing music, yes, but it wasn't that loud. And I'm done now anyway." Her voice was calm, not confrontational. Stan thrust the paper forward again. "Nevertheless, you're in violation. There's a $100 fine payable within 5 days. If you fail to comply, the fee increases to $250. And we'll continue increasing it if the noise continues." I glanced at Hannah. She gave a small shrug, then asked, "May I see the bylaw stating this new rule?" Eddie laughed under his breath, as though the question was absurd. "Look, we don't have to stand here justifying ourselves. We have the authority from the board. If you don't want more trouble, pay the fine." Now Hannah's expression shifted into the focused, unblinking stare I recognized from her days leading squads in training scenarios. She took a slow breath. "I respect legitimate HOA rules, but I want to see written evidence that the rest of the board approved this new noise restriction. Without that, I won't pay anything." Stan clenched his jaw. Eddie's eyes flicked uncertainly. Finally, Stan muttered, "Fine. Expect a formal notice in your mailbox." Then he turned on his heel, with Eddie trailing, muttering curses under his breath. We closed the door. Hannah sighed and gave me a wry smile. "They're bullies. Plain and simple. I don't think I should just cave in." I nodded, uneasy, but I also knew that defying Karen's enforcers was like stepping on a hornet's nest. They might double their efforts to find any infraction against us. Sure enough, within 2 days, we received an official-looking envelope stamped with Arcadia Ridge HOA. Inside was a letter from Karen herself, citing a newly ratified policy on morning noise and imposing a $100 fine for the alleged violation. No references to a vote, no signatures from the other board members, and no mention of the required process for passing new bylaws. It was obviously suspect. Hannah was prepared to fight it, but we had no idea how quickly things would escalate. Up to this point, few people in the neighborhood were aware of Hannah's military background. She's the type who doesn't boast about her accomplishments or brag about her service. Her unassuming demeanor and easy laugh hide the fact that she's a highly trained operative capable of advanced security protocols, hand-to-hand combat, and strategic planning. She had served in an elite special operations unit, deployed multiple times. The specifics remain classified, but suffice it to say she's well-versed in counterintelligence and close-quarters defense. Part of her post-service counseling encouraged her to maintain a calm environment, so she was deeply motivated to keep her personal life free from conflict. Yet her instincts and skills didn't vanish the day she hung up her uniform. Only a few neighbors, those with military backgrounds themselves, suspected she had specialized training. They'd noticed subtle tells, the precision in her morning runs, the way she scanned her surroundings, her habit of sitting with her back to a wall in public spaces. She never bragged, never showed off, but if pressed, she would speak matter-of-factly about her time in the service, leaving out the grittier details. Karen and her enforcers, however, had no clue. They saw only a quiet woman who occasionally played music during workouts. If they'd known the extent of her expertise, they might have realized cornering her was a terrible idea. Instead, they assumed intimidation would work on any unsuspecting homeowner. Meanwhile, Hannah started documenting every interaction with the enforcers. She compiled photos, saved letters, and kept notes. She also reached out to friends from her unit, some still on active duty, some retired but in private security. Through discreet conversations, she learned the importance of collecting evidence in case Karen tried anything legally actionable. "I might never need all this," Hannah told me one night, tapping her phone full of images, "but it's better to be prepared. In the field, we always keep thorough records of potential threats." I agreed, but secretly hoped it wouldn't come to a real confrontation. Despite Karen's overreach, I wanted to believe there was a limit to how far she'd go. But Hannah's instincts were sharper than mine when it came to reading adversaries. The tension that had been simmering finally boiled over one Friday afternoon. Hannah and I had driven out for groceries, leaving our home unattended for a couple of hours. When we returned, I noticed that our side gate was ajar, swinging in the breeze. Hannah immediately went on alert. We stepped into the backyard to find Stan and Eddie, along with a third individual from the committee named Marcia, standing by our back porch. Stan was kneeling, seemingly measuring the steps. Eddie was rummaging in a bag of tools. Marcia clutched her ever-present clipboard. Hannah's voice cut through the air. "What exactly do you think you're doing on our property?" Stan stood up, startled. For a second, I saw genuine panic in his eyes. Then he composed himself. "We're, conducting a property inspection. We have reason to believe these back steps aren't up to code height. If they're too tall or too short, that's a violation." My jaw tightened. "You can't just barge into someone's yard without permission. This is trespassing." Marcia sniffed indignantly. "The enforcement committee has the right to inspect for violations. It's in the charter." She waved the clipboard at us. Hannah took a slow step closer, her posture steady, reminiscent of a soldier approaching an intruder. "Show me where it says that." Her voice was low, calm, but loaded with a quiet authority. "Show me the part of the official HOA charter that allows you to enter private property without the owner's consent." Marcia's mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. Eddie bristled. "Don't you talk to her that way. We're just doing our job, ensuring compliance." Hannah folded her arms. "Then you won't mind me calling the police to make sure everything is above board. We can let actual law enforcement sort out whether this is a legitimate inspection or unlawful trespassing." She pulled out her phone. Stan exchanged a glance with Eddie. For a moment, they seemed to consider leaving, but Stan decided to double down. "Sure, call whoever you want. We've got the backing of Ms. Arnett, who has the full authority of the HOA. Is she here?" Hannah asked, scanning the yard. "I'm curious to see her official documentation as well." Marcia made a noise of frustration. "She's overseeing another inspection, but we're more than enough to assess a clear violation, like those steps." I looked at our porch steps. They'd been there since we bought the house, and the home inspection gave them a thumbs up. Even if they were slightly off some arcane metric, forcibly entering our backyard was outrageous. Without waiting further, Hannah dialed the non-emergency police line, which she kept saved from her security consultant work. She calmly explained the situation, focusing on the trespassing aspect. Meanwhile, Stan and Eddie started to argue, accusing us of overreacting. Marcia scribbled frantically on her clipboard, as if taking notes for a scathing report. Within 10 minutes, a patrol car pulled up. An officer hopped out, had a brief conversation with Hannah, then approached the committee members. He politely asked them to step outside our property. They blustered about HOA authority. The officer replied that an HOA covenant does not override criminal statutes regarding trespassing. The law requires either explicit permission or a court order to enter someone's backyard. In the end, the officer ushered them out of our gate and took down everyone's statements. Eddie spat on the grass, muttering under his breath about high and mighty folks. Stan threatened that Karen would hear about this, and we'd regret involving the cops. Marcia's face was bright red as she tried to save face, stammering about how we'd be fined for sure. The officer left with a curt reminder that if they tried this again without permission or a valid court order, they could be arrested for trespassing. Hannah thanked him, and as soon as he drove off, she exhaled a long breath. "That might escalate things," she said softly. She was right. Later that evening, our mailbox contained a new letter. a bold accusation that we had physically threatened committee members and refused a standard compliance inspection. The letter threatened serious repercussions, up to and including legal action, if we didn't allow them to complete their so-called inspection at a scheduled time. It was signed by Rosalind, Karen Arnett, and co-signed by Stan, Eddie, and Marcia. Hannah read it, then locked eyes with me. I won't be bullied. If they try anything like that again, I'll be ready. I could tell from her tone that she didn't mean violence. She meant preparedness, the sort she'd learned in countless operations overseas. Neither of us guessed how soon she'd need to call on those skills. Word spread rapidly through Arcadia Ridge about the confrontation in our backyard. Some neighbors congratulated us in hushed voices for standing up to the committee. Others warned that Karen and her cohorts would retaliate, as they had done to others who'd crossed them. We started receiving veiled threats. Notes taped to our door at odd hours: stop stirring trouble or face the consequences. Anonymous phone calls with someone breathing heavily, then hanging up. Hannah kept careful logs of each incident. She installed additional cameras around the perimeter of our home. She also set up a motion sensor security light in the backyard, determined to leave no dark corners unmonitored. I reached out to Carl, the nominal HOA president, hoping to clarify the situation. Over the phone, he sounded flustered. I never authorized a separate enforcement committee, he admitted. At least not in this heavy-handed sense. This has gotten out of control, but Karen wields so much influence. She's convinced half the community that strict rules are necessary to preserve property values. When I pressed him on the official validity of Karen's letters, he sighed. The board has not signed off on half the stuff she's mailing. Some of it is purely her initiative, possibly illegal. But confronting her, it's a mess. Carl's hands seemed tied. Patricia and Ron, the other board members, apparently wanted to oust Karen but feared legal battles. They lacked the necessary majority or the will to engage her head-on, especially since Karen's circle had grown. Meanwhile, the rest of the neighborhood remained intimidated into silence. For Hannah, it was a waiting game. She sensed that Karen would soon try a more forceful approach. Several times, Hannah mentioned to me that bullies like Karen escalate if they sense defiance, especially if they believe they have an upper hand. The addition of Stan, Eddie, and Marcia, along with a few others, gave Karen the confidence to attempt something more direct. That tension came to a head one late afternoon when I was out running errands. Hannah stayed home, tying up some projects for her security consulting job. She was alone in the house, unless you count the watchful presence of our newly installed security cameras. Unbeknownst to Hannah, a small convoy of vehicles had driven into our cul-de-sac, carrying Karen and several members of her so-called enforcement committee. Their plan: corner Hannah into signing an agreement to allow full inspections or face immediate sanctions. They likely chose that time believing I wouldn't be there, assuming Hannah, by herself, would be more easily intimidated. They were wrong, very, very wrong. Hannah was in our living room when she heard the unmistakable sound of multiple car doors slamming outside. She checked the camera feed on her phone. A group of about 6 people, led by Karen in a strikingly bright blouse and a scowl fit for battle, marched up our front path. Accompanying her were Stan, Eddie, Marcia, and 2 men Hannah didn't recognize. Sensing the confrontation, Hannah calmly set her phone to record mode, tapped a quick text to me that read, "Trouble. ETA?" She also sent a discreet signal to a small chat group made up of her former special ops teammates, people who lived within a short drive or maintained off-duty local assignments. They had always told each other, if you need backup, call. None of us ever expected Hannah would need backup over an HOA dispute, but she believed in being prepared. Moments later, the doorbell rang, followed by loud banging. Hannah took a breath, straightened her posture, and opened the door. The group seemed surprised to see her appear so composed. Karen stepped forward, face tense. "Hannah Henderson, we're here on official HOA business. You've refused lawful inspections, threatened committee members, and disrespected the rules of Arcadia Ridge." Her voice dripped with self-righteousness. Stan and Eddie stood behind her, arms folded, like bodyguards. Marcia clutched another clipboard, and the 2 unfamiliar men tried to look intimidating. Hannah regarded them calmly. "I believe this is private property, and you're trespassing if you enter without permission." Karen thrust a folder forward. "We have documents authorizing an immediate compliance check. We can do this the easy way, or we can do it the hard way." Hannah didn't move to accept the folder. Instead, she quietly asked, "Does Carl know about this? Or Patricia and Ron?" Karen's nostrils flared. "Don't worry about them. I'm effectively the acting president for this situation, given their inactivity. Now, step aside. Stan moved as if to push past Hannah, but she angled her body, preventing him from slipping in. A flicker of frustration crossed his features. Look, Eddie said, we don't want trouble. Just let us in, let us check your house and yard, and we'll be on our way. The words check your house set off alarm bells. They clearly intended to push beyond typical HOA purview, rummaging through our home for so-called violations. This was an outrageous overreach. Hannah's stance stiffened. I'm warning you, this is not going to happen. You have no legal authority to conduct a search. Karen rolled her eyes dramatically. Then we impose immediate fines and legal action. We might even have reason to remove you from the community. It's all in the charter. Hannah shook her head. Arcadia Ridge's actual charter doesn't allow forced entry or inspections without the homeowner's consent. If you truly have evidence of a bylaw violation, you should follow the due process, send an official notice, schedule a mutually agreed inspection, or obtain a court order. You think you're so clever, Karen hissed. Fine. We tried being civil. Stan. Eddie, do what you need to do. Stan grabbed the door, trying to wedge his shoulder in. Hannah stepped back. In one fluid motion, she pressed a hidden button on her phone to activate a voice call with her old team. She also left the door partially open, ensuring the security camera in the hallway captured everything. Eddie moved to assist Stan. That's when Hannah took a measured step back and said, I'm telling you to stop. Entering without consent is trespassing, possibly breaking and entering if you force your way in. Karen's voice trembled with rage. No more warnings. Stan shoved the door wide. Hannah reacted swiftly. With a single pivot, she grabbed his wrist and applied just enough torque to force him off balance, directing him sideways into the door frame. Eddie froze mid-step, suddenly realizing this wasn't an ordinary homeowner. Stan yelped in pain, dropping to one knee. Hannah released him as soon as he backed away, ensuring she didn't escalate beyond self-defense. Eddie lunged forward, and Hannah sidestepped, hooking his arm and guiding his momentum so he stumbled onto the porch. Karen shrieked. Marcia gasped. The two unknown men looked at each other, momentarily unsure if they should intervene. Everything had happened in seconds, leaving Stan and Eddie groaning on the front step. Hannah stood in the doorway, breathing steadily. I told you not to come in, she said, her voice still calm but now carrying a sharpened edge. This is private property. Leave now. Karen's eyes blazed. You assaulted them. You'll pay for this. You'll go to jail for attacking HOA officials. Hannah lifted her phone, showing that it was still recording. I have evidence you were forcing entry. My cameras recorded everything from multiple angles. If you don't leave right now, I'll call the police for attempted break-in. Karen's face contorted, uncertain whether to rush forward or retreat. The two men behind her puffed up their chests, but neither wanted to be thrown around. Stan cursed under his breath and scrambled to his feet with Eddie's help. Fine, Karen spat. But this isn't over. We'll be back with real authority. She stormed off, motioning for the others to follow. They retreated to their cars, and within a minute, the convoy roared away. Hannah locked the door, heart pounding. She immediately checked the perimeter cameras, verifying they were gone. Then she sank onto the couch, letting out a shaky breath. For all her training, physically confronting neighbors in her own home felt surreal. Her phone buzzed with concerned texts from her old squad members, ready to roll out if necessary. She replied that the immediate threat was gone for now. But in that moment, she knew Karen would undoubtedly retaliate with every means at her disposal. This clash had moved from petty citations to a genuine escalation, reminiscent of a standoff between a rogue militia and a well-trained operative. The difference was Hannah had the law on her side and a formidable network of allies if push came to shove. I returned home to find Hannah visibly shaken but uninjured, the front porch scuffed with signs of the struggle. She recounted the confrontation in clipped, methodical detail. Anger flared inside me, though I tried to remain level-headed. It was deeply unsettling to realize that a group of neighbors felt empowered to force their way into our home. That evening, Hannah placed calls to a few of her closest former teammates, Jackson, Elena, and Victor, all living within an hour's drive. Though some might think it excessive to involve special ops veterans in an HOA dispute, Hannah reasoned that once people show willingness to trespass and use physical coercion, the situation surpasses everyday neighborly spats. She wanted a nonviolent but firm show of solidarity if Karen's group returned. The following afternoon, the squad arrived. Jackson was a big, easygoing man with a quiet confidence that belied his formidable skill set. Elena, sharp-eyed and methodical, had a background in tactical communications. Victor, tall and lean, specialized in negotiation and cultural liaison work overseas. They were all used to high-stakes missions. When they pulled up in two separate cars, neighbors gawked at the unfamiliar vehicles. The group stepped out, each carrying the air of individuals who knew how to handle a crisis. They weren't decked in any intimidating gear, just casual clothes, but their demeanor and synergy were unmistakable. They greeted Hannah warmly, exchanging quick updates. She led them into our living room, where I offered refreshments. Elena spoke first. "We got your footage. This is beyond an HOA dispute. They tried to force their way in with no legal basis. In some states, that's burglary or home invasion, depending on the details." Jackson nodded. "We're not about to start a war with your neighbors, but we'll help you present a united front. We can monitor the property, record any further attempts, and ensure the police have the evidence they need. We'll also keep the situation from escalating if they show up in large numbers again." Victor added, "If any rational conversation is still possible with the rest of the board, we can help mediate. But it seems this Karen woman is off the deep end." Hannah sighed. "She's determined to prove her authority, and she won't back down easily." As evening fell, we prepared for the possibility of another showdown. The squad checked vantage points around the exterior, set up a few additional cameras, and established a group text thread for immediate alerts. They took turns patrolling the sidewalk, casually but attentively, ensuring that if Karen or her enforcers returned, they wouldn't catch us by surprise. Around midnight, a pair of headlights rolled slowly down the street, pausing in front of our house. Jackson and Victor observed from behind our picket fence, staying out of sight. The vehicle eventually drove off. We couldn't confirm who it was, but we suspected it might be Stan or Eddie scoping out the scene. By morning, no direct confrontation had happened, yet the presence of Hannah's team reassured us. A chain of events was now in motion. Karen's group had learned we weren't alone and we wouldn't cower. The next question was whether she'd escalate further or try a new angle of attack. Late the next day, Carl, the official HOA president, unexpectedly dropped by. He came alone, looking exhausted. "I heard rumors about a fight here," he said, his voice quivering with anxiety. "Karen's telling people you assaulted her committee." Hannah invited him in and calmly recounted the events, showing him the video footage. Carl's face went pale as he realized how far Karen's group had gone. Trespassing, attempted forced entry, physical aggression. This is, oh dear. She's putting the entire HOA in jeopardy. "If you press charges, it could bankrupt us with legal fees," he murmured, wringing his hands. Hannah looked him squarely in the eyes. "I'm not out to destroy the HOA. I just want to live peacefully. Karen's behavior is unacceptable, and it's illegal. You need to take steps to remove her or curb her powers. If she tries this again, we won't hesitate to involve the police." Carl nodded miserably. "I'll call an emergency meeting of the board. She's gone rogue. Maybe we can strip her of any official role. But I'm worried she'll fight back, and we don't have the money for a big legal battle." Sure enough, Karen appeared to sense her precarious position. That afternoon, the entire neighborhood received an email blast from her, riddled with inflammatory accusations about subversive elements in Arcadia Ridge, referencing violent residents who defied lawful inspections, clearly pointing at us. She threatened liens, lawsuits, and immediate property confiscation if necessary to preserve community standards. Elena, scanning the email from Hannah's laptop, let out a low whistle. She's implicating the HOA in all kinds of unlawful threats. If this is circulated widely, it's going to blow up in her face. Victor pulled out his phone. "I'm forwarding this to a lawyer friend. This can't be legal. She's basically threatening to seize private property without any court order or due process. That's fraudulent intimidation." As dusk settled, the stage was set for Karen's final desperate act. Word spread that she planned a large-scale operation to show she wasn't bluffing. We had no clue what that meant. Would she arrive with more enforcers, some legal document, or an off-duty security guard? At around 8 p.m., we heard commotion at the end of the block. Through our cameras, we spotted a small group wearing cheap, matching shirts, perhaps an attempt at an official uniform. They gathered behind Karen, who waved a thick sheaf of papers, shouting that she had court-approved authority to evict or fine any resident in noncompliance. She spouted false legal jargon loud enough for neighbors to hear. Hannah's teammates quietly took positions around our property, nothing dramatic or armed, just watchful. I stood on the porch with Hannah, bracing for what came next. Karen's group marched down the sidewalk, chanting about taking back the neighborhood from troublemakers. Some neighbors peeked from windows. A few even ventured onto their lawns, alarmed. When Karen reached our house, she held up a paper triumphantly. "This is an official notice granting me the right to impose immediate sanctions," she bellowed. Hannah calmly asked, "Signed by which judge or legitimate authority?" Karen scanned the document, ignoring the question. "Per the authority vested in me by Arcadia Ridge, we demand you vacate or cooperate with a full property inspection. Failure to comply means you forfeit your ownership rights." A couple of her supporters mumbled agreement, though they seemed uneasy under the watchful gaze of Hannah's team. Elena stepped forward with a polite but firm expression. "Ma'am, that's not how property rights work. You can't seize a home without a court-ordered eviction or foreclosure process." Karen's face twisted. "Who are you?" Elena gave a thin smile. "Someone who understands the law. Show us the court order if you have one." Karen brandished the paper, but from where I stood, it looked like a poorly doctored document. Possibly the same forged nonsense. Some lines were misaligned. The seal looked like a low-resolution copy. Hannah took out her phone and snapped photos. Stan, Eddie, Marcia, and a handful of other enforcers shifted around, clearly uncertain. They expected compliance or fear, but instead they faced a calm, united front and multiple witnesses. Victor and Jackson quietly recorded the entire scene. Finally, in a last fit of rage, Karen tried to push past us again. "Move aside. By the time I'm done, you'll regret ignoring the HOA's rightful authority." She lunged toward the porch, but Jackson smoothly stepped in front, not aggressively, just blocking her path. "You should stop," he said in a measured tone. "We have footage and records of everything. If you cross this line, you're committing a crime, and we'll call the police. Look around. These neighbors are watching you threaten a homeowner's rights without any real legal grounds." Karen's eyes flickered, and she realized the precariousness of her position. A few of her supporters seemed ready to leave. Stan hovered, looking defensive, but no one wanted a physical altercation. Silence hung for a moment. Then Karen let out a frustrated shriek. "You'll all pay." She whirled around, storming off with her committee trailing behind. Neighbors stepped back to let them pass, some filming on phones. The final blow to Karen's facade came when a neighbor, Mr. Holcomb, shouted, "Stop lying to everyone. Karen, we're done with you." Applause broke out on a few lawns. The would-be invasion ended as quickly as it began, but the real consequences were about to unfold. We spent the rest of the night collecting statements from neighbors who witnessed Karen's meltdown. Some had video. Others had saved her threatening emails. Carl, the HOA president, arrived later with Patricia and Ron, horrified at Karen's brazen display of false authority. Early the next morning, Hannah and I visited the local police station, accompanied by Elena and Jackson. We filed a formal complaint of trespassing and harassment against Karen and her key associates, submitting copies of all the footage and documents. The detective on duty listened carefully, eyebrows climbing higher with each new piece of evidence. "This is quite extensive," he murmured, flipping through pages of forged letters and viewing our recorded videos. "We can see about an arrest warrant for criminal trespass, possibly attempted fraud or extortion. We'll coordinate with the district attorney." Meanwhile, Carl petitioned the HOA board to hold an emergency vote to remove Karen from her position entirely. Patricia and Ron voted in favor, citing unapproved use of association funds for printing official documents. That same day, the board announced Karen's immediate suspension, followed by a formal notice that all enforcement committee activities were halted. The house of cards she'd built toppled quickly. When the police questioned Stan, Eddie, and Marcia, they folded under pressure, revealing that Karen had assured them she possessed the legal right to confiscate properties. They blindly believed her. Some stammered they never intended real harm, that they thought they were just doing their duty. Karen, cornered by official inquiries, tried to claim she was misunderstood, that the documents were only drafts or proposals. But the evidence was too strong. Many neighbors came forward to file their own reports of harassment and intimidation, including older residents who'd been too scared to speak up before. Within a week, the district attorney's office issued multiple charges against Karen. forgery of legal documents, criminal trespassing, attempted extortion, and harassment. The severity of the potential jail time depended on how the court interpreted her repeated threats to seize homes. Stan and Eddie faced lesser charges, mostly related to trespassing and harassment. They cooperated with investigators to reduce their own liability. Karen's downfall was swift and definitive. During a dramatic court hearing, she was arraigned and swiftly advised to seek a plea bargain. She spent a few nights in county jail before posting bail. But the damage to her reputation and finances was done. The HOA, eager to distance itself, also filed a civil suit to reclaim money Karen had misappropriated. In short, her property became entangled in lawsuits, leading to substantial liens and, eventually, confiscation. With Karen removed and facing jail time, the atmosphere in Arcadia Ridge transformed almost overnight. The phony committee disbanded, the petty inspections ceased, and neighbors no longer lived in fear of unannounced intrusions or baseless fines. Carl, Patricia, and Ron worked diligently to repair the HOA's public image. They sent out letters clarifying that all enforcement policies from Karen's era were nullified unless formally approved by a proper board vote. A wave of relief washed over the community. People began hosting block parties, exchanging phone numbers for genuine neighborly watch programs, and mending fences, literally and figuratively. The new board put in place stricter oversight rules to prevent any single individual from assuming unilateral power. They established a transparent complaint system, so any alleged rule violation had to follow a formal, documented process with checks and balances. Hannah's name spread quietly as the woman who stood up to Karen. Rumors circulated about her special ops background. Some folks asked her questions about military life, while others were simply grateful that she had the courage to say no when everyone else felt powerless. She downplayed her role, emphasizing that it was a group effort. We had the support of neighbors, the police, and her old teammates. As for her fellow special ops colleagues, Elena, Jackson, and Victor, they formed friendships with some residents during their brief stay. Occasionally, they dropped by for barbecues, turning the site of the final confrontation into a place of camaraderie and laughter. Meanwhile, Karen's legal battles proceeded. In the end, she accepted a plea deal that included jail time for forgery and attempted fraud, along with hefty restitution to the HOA. Her home, once the pristine symbol of her perceived authority, went into foreclosure as she struggled to cover mounting fines and court costs. The judge showed little sympathy for her claims of misinterpretation. The evidence of her threats was crystal clear. Months later, Hannah and I sat on our newly refinished porch, sipping lemonade and enjoying a sunny afternoon. The tension that once plagued Arcadia Ridge had evaporated. Children played on sidewalks, neighbors strolled by smiling, and the entire place felt closer to the ideal we'd hoped for when we first moved in. Think we'll get any more knocks on the door from self-appointed enforcers? I joked. Hannah flashed a wry grin. They're welcome to try, but I doubt they want to see me in action again. We both laughed, the memory of that harrowing confrontation now softened by the knowledge that justice prevailed. The real heroes, Hannah often said, were the neighbors who finally stood up for each other, the honest board members like Carl who risked backlash to do what was right, and the local police who took a suburban dispute seriously enough to protect homeowners' rights. In the end, Arcadia Ridge was a testament to how a neighborhood could bounce back from the clutches of a tyrannical HOA Karen and her misguided minions. And as for those misguided minions, Stan and Eddie eventually apologized, ashamed at being manipulated. They too found a place in the new community spirit, under much stricter guidelines, naturally. Karen's ultimate fate served as a warning. No matter how inflated one's sense of authority, you can't manufacture legal power to strong-arm innocent people. Especially not when one of those people is a well-trained soldier with an unwavering sense of justice and friends ready to back her up at a moment's notice. Not long after Karen's property was seized and she was sentenced to serve time, the Arcadia Ridge newsletter featured an article titled "Community Over Conflict: Moving Forward in Unity." It referenced the changes introduced to promote transparency, open board meetings with rotating leadership, simplified bylaws, and an explicit ban on any rogue enforcement committee. The piece concluded with a reminder: we are neighbors, not adversaries. While the scars of Karen's reign lingered, the healing process brought many residents closer together than before. Mrs. Platt, once fined for her garden statue, placed a larger, whimsical sculpture in her front yard with the board's official blessing symbolic of the new freedoms. The teenage son with the pickup truck no longer feared citations for driveway parking. and elderly residents no longer trembled at the sight of clipboards or unexpected knocks on the door. Hannah continued her remote security consulting, occasionally traveling for specialized projects. She never boasted about her role in dethroning Karen. If pressed, she'd only say, "I did what anyone should do in their own home, stand up for themselves." My work as a tech consultant carried on, more comfortably now that I had a worry-free environment. Sometimes, after dinner, Hannah would walk the neighborhood. She'd greet neighbors, admiring gardens or commending them for a new paint color on their shutters. The memory of Karen's attempt to control every detail now served as a reminder: an HOA can keep a community orderly, but it must never become a vehicle for tyranny. People must remain vigilant, ensuring no single individual wields unchecked power. In the broader sense, Karen learned that forging false authority is a dangerous game. By forging official documents and threatening to seize private property, she crossed the line from nuisance to criminal. The courts did not take kindly to someone impersonating legal authorities, especially when backed up by intimidation tactics. Her downfall was both swift and inevitable once exposed. Arcadia Ridge, meanwhile, thrived without her. The sense of unease dissipated, replaced by a collective determination to prevent future abuses. And in the Henderson household, ours, we finally enjoyed the peaceful suburban life we had sought. Hannah's morning workouts continued, music playing at an acceptable volume, and no one dared complain about it again. In the end, this story is a testament to community resilience and a stark reminder that behind any quiet suburban street, there can lurk self-appointed enforcers hungry for power. But as Karen discovered, if you threaten the wrong homeowner, especially one with professional defense training and a robust support network, you might just find yourself on the receiving end of real, lawful justice. When the dust settles, the only legacy you leave behind is a cautionary tale of hubris, corruption, and a downfall that shook an entire neighborhood awake.